greatness. For Reb Nachman, performing the commandments is a joke, a comic performance, for God is so great, so beyond us, that nothing could possibly count as serving God. And, oh wait, did I skip this? Did you see this?
Yeah, we did.
You saw this? And this?
That's what you just said.
Okay.
We'll now soak that in.
Now, Reb Nachman's disciple wrote this about his master. Our teacher said that the main thing is the will, to yearn always with a craving and a strong desire to fulfill his commandments. And thereby we study Torah as though we were studying, and pray as though we were praying, and perform the commandments as though we were performing the commandments. The Jew performs the commandments as though by doing so, he or she was reaching God. But God is not reached. It is all a comic performance. The main thing for Reb Nachman is the yearning, the craving for God. To perform the commandments with utter devotion, while aware of how comical that is the only way to do justice both to our yearning and to God's utter transcendence. Here I must point out that recognizing the comic status of a religious act does not imply a lack of seriousness in its performance. On the contrary, the more seriously one performs the ritual, knowing it is comic, the more one attests to the greatness of God. This is because one thereby proclaims that no matter how seriously and meticulously one performs the minute details of the ritual, it is still a comedy. For God, indeed, one must be willing to make of oneself a comic fool. In this, Reb Nachman tells us that Judaism itself teaches the impossibility of reconciliation with God. Now, I have to be careful here, because he thought that this can only be taught to the wise, which will also become relevant later, not to the masses. All that matters is purity of heart. As I will now argue, the first one to learn that truth, according to Reb Nachman, was Abraham. And Abraham learned that truth at the aborted sacrifice, the aborted sacrifice of Isaac. My understanding of Reb Nachman on the Akedah, this sacrifice, is based on one of many stories, which appears in this book, Reb Nachman told, namely, the humble king and the wise man. Now you have this handout, so let's look at it together, because we're going to be referring to this over and over in what follows. Are you ready? I've taken out some bits here and there which are not pertinent to the flow of the story. Once there was a king who had a wise man. The king said to the wise man, "There is a certain king who designates himself a mighty hero, a man of truth and a humble person. As to his might, I know that he is mighty. But why he designates himself a man of truth and a humble person, this I do not know. And I want you to fetch me the portrait of that king." The wise man went to that country. The wise man made up his mind that he had to know the essence of the country. And how could he know the essence of the country? By the country's jokes. Because when one has to know something, one should know the jokes about it. Among all countries, there is one country which includes all countries. In that country, there is one city which includes all cities of the whole country, which includes all countries. In that city, there is a house which includes all the houses of the city, which includes all the cities of the country, which includes all countries. And there is a man who includes everybody from that house, etc. And there is someone there who performs all the clowning and jokes of the country. The wise man went there. He saw that they were performing all kinds of jests and jokes. And he understood through the jokes that the country was full of lies from beginning to end. The wise man understood through that laughter that the whole country was full of lies and deceit, and there was no truth to it. Finally, he came to the king himself. When he came to the king, he said, the country is full of lies, all of it, from beginning to end. There's no truth in it. He started telling all the lies of the country. The king bent his ears towards the curtain to hear his words, because he was amazed that there was a man who knew all the lies of the country. The wise man concluded, and one could say to the king too is like them, that he loves deceit like the country. But from this I see how you are a man of truth. You are far from them, since you cannot stand the lies of the country. He started praising the king very much. The king was very humble, and his greatness lay in his humility. And this is the way of the humble person. The more one praises and exalts him, the smaller and humbler he becomes. Because of the greatness of the praise with which the wise man praised and exalted the king became very humble and small until he became nothing at all. And the king could not restrain himself and cast away the curtain to see the wise man, to see who it is who knows and understands all this. And his face was revealed. The wise man saw him and brought the king's portrait to the king. End of the story. Now, generally, the king in Reb Nachman's stories is God. So the king who sends the wise man is God. But then the king to whom the wise man is sent is also God. God sends the wise man to discover the nature of God. The wise man accomplishes his mission. He has discovered that the king is a man of truth. This was an account of the king being utterly removed or far from the corrupt country. The wise man also discovered what was meant by the king's humility. The more the wise man praised the king, the more holy other was the king, until the king became nothing at all. It was then that the wise man was truly able to see the king. What happened here? It was then that the wise man was able to truly see the king. But by then, the king was nothing. So, we must conclude that the portrait that the wise man painted and brought back to the king must have been an empty portrait. Now, in a gloss to our story, it says that the place to which the wise man is sent is Zion. And a disciple of Nachman explains this as follows. Perhaps this is what is meant in the story. That there is a country containing all countries. This is the encompassing holiness of the land of Israel. And in that country there is a city that contains all cities in that country. And that is Zion and Jerusalem. And in that city there is a house that contains all houses in the city, and that is the Holy Temple. If we adopt this suggestion, then the Holy Temple is the place where the wise man goes to hear the jokes. And the jester is the priest or the high priest. But can there be any comedy in the solemn service of sacrificing animals on the altar of the Lord? The Israeli scholar Tzvi Mark interprets the intended comedy or jokes at the Holy Temple as follows. In the temple, people give presents to the sublime, infinite God, atone before him with a meal offering of fine flour, see in the smell of the incense the smell of his being pleased, and the Levites sing to him to make his time pass pleasantly. Is there a greater comedy than that? The Divine Comedy describes God, the infinite, as changing his mind because of the bribe of a calf. According to this, the comedy played out in the Holy Temple signifies for Reb Nachman at its most intense the comic nature of all religious practice. Now, some of Reb Nachman's stories have been taken to include allegorical elements about biblical characters, especially the patriarchs. I think our story has such elements. I think there are elements of it that don't fit to that, but I think it has such allegorical elements. And I have 6 reasons for thinking Abraham to be the wise man of our story. 2 of which reasons allude to the sacrifice of Isaac. So let's look at those 6 reasons, and you can look back at your handout now to follow me, of why I think there is an allegorical content to Abraham. Number 1, Abraham, in Genesis 12:1, is the patriarch who God sends out to a different country, just as the king sends the wise man away to a different land. Number 2, Jewish tradition often speaks of Abraham as a wise man. Here is a rabbinic saying, Genesis Rabbah, that on Proverbs, the wise in heart will accept commands. This is Abraham. And another says that Abraham was commanded to go to the land of Canaan because he was a wise man, precisely because he was a wise man. And Reb Nachman himself refers to Abraham as a wise man, and as far as I can tell, he does not refer to any of the other patriarchs in this way. So we have here allusions to the wise man Abraham being sent to another land. Reason 3. Here's a rabbinic midrash, Genesis Rabbah, which says as follows. When a king and his beloved are together in a room with a curtain between them. Remember in our story, the curtain between the king and the wise man. When the king wishes to speak with his beloved, he folds the curtain and speaks with his beloved. Now, consistently in Jewish tradition, as in Isaiah 41, it is Abraham who is God's beloved, the beloved of God.